Picture this. You're a child sitting in your classroom. Class is just about to start, and suddenly a teacher starts searching everyone's pockets. He gets to a little girl, and he finds something that literally seals her fate. It was just 5 kernels of grain. For this, the teacher forces her to kneel on the hard concrete floor and repeatedly strikes her on the head with a wooden stick until she collapses. Her classmates have to silently carry her home, and that very night, she dies. Now, this sounds like an absolute nightmare, right? But the terrifying truth is, this was daily life for 40 school children locked up in one of North Korea's deadliest facilities.
So welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking a really structured, unflinching look at the horrors of North Korea's most notorious prison camps. By digging into verified satellite data, reports from human rights organizations, and some incredibly harrowing survivor testimonies, we are going to unpack a brutal system that's been hidden from the rest of the world for decades. All right, let's start with part 1, inside the death camps. To really grasp this dark reality, we first need to understand what these extrajudicial facilities actually are and why experts compare them to the absolute darkest chapters in human history. The worst of these places are called a Kwan-liso, which translates to a total control zone. You have to understand, Camp 14 isn't a traditional prison where you do your time, get rehabilitated, and go home. Not at all. It's a space that exists entirely outside of humanity. People sent here, they never get out. The whole design, the entire purpose, is to work them to death in an inescapable, vicious cycle of deliberate starvation and relentless forced labor. And the sheer scale of this operation is just staggering. 153 square kilometers. To put that into perspective for you, Camp 14 alone is almost 3 times the size of Manhattan. It is a massive, sprawling complex locked down by a 60-kilometer electrified fence, patrol paths, and heavily armed guard posts. It stretches all the way from river valleys up to mountain peaks, and it even has its own internal railroad network and power generation. It's basically an entirely self-contained world of suffering. Inside that massive perimeter, absolute obedience is enforced through 10 brutal camp rules. Rule number 1, fail to report an escape, you're shot immediately. Rule 3, stealing or concealing food, shot immediately. And honestly, this is exactly why that little girl with the 5 kernels of grain was beaten to death. Even the tiniest, most insignificant infraction brings instant, merciless execution. Moving on to Section 2, punished for family ties. Now, you might be asking yourself, what on earth did these people do to end up in such a horrific place? Well, the shocking truth is, most of them did absolutely nothing. The whole system hinges on this regime concept known as yunj, which means guilt by association. It's an extrajudicial tool for collective punishment. So if the authorities even suspect someone of having anti-regime thoughts, they don't just come for that person. They'll show up in the middle of the night and take away up to 3 entire generations of their family. Completely innocent people, punished simply because of their bloodline.
The completely terrifying and arbitrary nature of this system is perfectly captured by the story of a man named Kim Yong. Talk about 2 different lives. At one point, he was part of the government elite, a high-ranking military officer, vice president of a state company, a guy who enjoyed culture and literally had a chauffeur. Next thing he knows, he's stripped of everything and dropped into a sunless coal mine in Camp 14. And why? Because the authorities dug up an old allegation that his father had supposedly spied for the United States over 40 years ago, an allegation that Kim Yong didn't even know about.
Let's look at Section 3, survival over family loyalty. You know, stripping away someone's former life is one thing, but the environment inside the camp systematically destroys basic human bonds from the inside out. Intimacy of any kind is strictly forbidden. An unauthorized pregnancy, that means both the mother and the baby are executed. Having a child is exclusively a reward granted by the guards. Our source actually follows the story of Shin Dong-hyuk, who was born inside Camp 14. Why? Because his parents were assigned to each other as a reward from the guards for their hard work and, most importantly, for snitching on their fellow inmates. Because he was born into this totally warped reality, Shin didn't grow up in anything resembling a real family. His mother was out there working 10 to 15 hours a day in the race fields, getting barely enough food to survive the night. And growing up, Shin didn't look at her as a source of comfort or love. To him, she was just a bitter rival in a desperate daily fight for scraps of food. It got to the point where he would regularly steal her meager rations before going to his camp school, knowing full well she would beat him for it when she found out. And this twisted dynamic culminated in an unimaginable betrayal. One night, Shin actually overheard his mother and brother quietly plotting to escape. Brainwashed by the camp's absolute rules and completely desperate for any kind of reward, this teenage kid reported his own family to the school's night guard. He even went so far as to sign a false police statement, claiming they had committed murder. Because of this, Shin was dragged to an execution site by the Taedong River and forced to stand there and watch the public execution of his own mother and brother.
Okay, Section 4, the impossible escapes.
In a place so horrific that you're forced to watch your family die, the instinct to run has to be overpowering. But escaping a Kwanli So is designed to be mathematically and physically impossible. You've got barbed wire walls, armed guards everywhere, intersecting lines of fire, machine guns. It's a fortress. Yet, against all odds, a handful of people have made it out. Take Kim Yong's miracle escape, for instance. After surviving a suicide attempt in the mines of Camp 14, he got transferred to Camp 18, which is slightly less brutal. One day, while loading a coal train, a guard accidentally spilled some grain. Instantly, there was a chaotic scramble among the starving prisoners. Kim Yong used that split-second distraction to literally squeeze himself into a tiny, narrow gap beneath a coal wagon's metal floor panel. The train rumbled out of the camp, and at 4 a.m. it rolled into Golan Station, where Kim slipped away into the night.
Shin Dong-hyuk's path to freedom, on the other hand, was much, much darker. He actually failed 2 early escape attempts where he tried crawling under fences. His punishment? He was thrown into a special detention center that was designed purely for torture. For 6 straight months, he was locked in a pitch-black cell with 0 windows and barely enough space to even lie down. The system tried to completely break him. But somehow Shin didn't give up. Once he was released back into the general population, he met a guy named Park, an elite prisoner who actually knew about the outside world. They were sent to chop wood in the mountains, and that's when they enacted their final plan. They waited for dusk to hide their footprints and then made a mad sprint toward the 10-foot high-voltage outer fence. It's a heart-pounding and deeply tragic story. Park slipped and hit the wire, instantly suffering lethal electrocution. Shin only survived by doing the unthinkable. He literally crawled over his friend's dead, burning body, using it to ground the electrical current just enough to slip through the gap. From there, he eventually made it across the river and into China.
That brings us to Section 5, the scars of survival.
Escaping the physical borders of North Korea doesn't mean you just leave the nightmare behind. The trauma of Camp 14 deeply, deeply scarred Shin's mind, and it led to a really complex aftermath. Actually, in 2015, Shin retracted and altered certain timeline details of a story that had been widely published. He came out and admitted that some memories were simply too painful and honestly too shameful to share truthfully right away. Psychologists are quick to point out that this is a very common coping mechanism for victims of severe torture and trauma. But let's be absolutely clear here. Human rights experts and independent investigators have verified that the core, fundamental truths of his imprisonment remain 100% fact. He was a political prisoner, he endured unimaginable torture, and yes, he really did witness the execution of his family.
Finally, let's look at Section 6, the hidden horrors today. The stories of Shin and Kim making it out are absolute miracles for sure, but we urgently need to talk about the nightmare that is still unfolding for the people left behind. Today, right now, human rights organizations estimate that a staggering 120,000 individuals are rotting in North Korean prison camps. Think about that number for a second. That's 120,000 people living the exact same horrors we've just spent time decoding.
And it's not like this system is fading away. Satellite data actually reveals the regime is actively upgrading this terrifying infrastructure. They've moved camps near the border further inland just to make escaping to China even harder. They are building new internal perimeters to isolate high-value prisoners, and they're adding advanced watchtowers with intersecting lines of fire specifically meant to exterminate anyone trying to leave. And perhaps most disturbingly, experts have noted evidence of Camp 16, which is located very close to the Pengyri nuclear testing facility. Scientists strongly believe prisoners there are being used and essentially sacrificed for hazardous post-nuclear test cleanup. So as we wrap up this explainer, the source data leaves zero doubt about the reality of these death camps. Innocent people were tortured and maimed yesterday, they're being tortured and maimed today, and unless something changes, the exact same thing will happen tomorrow. Knowing that this undeniable reality exists right now, just beyond an electrified fence, what is our moral, ethical, and political obligation to the thousands of people still trapped in the dark? It's a heavy question, but one we have to ask. Thank you so much for joining me to understand this incredibly crucial topic.